Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome into Two-Man Game on ClaibsOnline.com. I'm Matthew Roccio. That's my partner in this little escapade of basketball conversation, Bob Ramsey, voice of your St. Louis Billikens. Rammer, how are you doing today, sir?
Great. Recovering from Thanksgiving, family and friends, and a marvelous meal, or should I say meals, plural, for several days, plus pumpkin pie and homemade whipped cream, and I've gained weight, and it's going to take a while to get it off.
Fair enough, but hey, it's good weight. It's family weight. That's a good kind of weight, right?
That's right.
There you go. Well, we're going to jump in and talk a lot about the St. Louis Billikens. Obviously, since we last spoken, they have played 7 basketball games. They've won 5 of them, lost 2 of them. Obviously the 2 losses in the Myrtle Beach Invitational were rough games. The 1-point loss just the other night against Dartmouth. A lot of people have comments on that one as well.
1-point win.
W.
It just felt like a loss.
Yeah, well, yeah, that'll happen sometimes. And we're going to dive into a couple of those. I have thoughts. Rammer has thoughts as well. But one thing I wanted to jump into that we didn't get into last episode when we started the season was comments made by Chris May on Frank Cusimano's radio show at the very beginning of November, where he pretty much talked about how 20 points has been a good measuring stick, but they got to move past that. And I think that was the first time we had heard a comment like that from Chris May, and I thought it was very interesting to hear him come out and say that. So considering everything we've seen from Travis Ford over the last, close to a decade at this point, your thoughts when you heard Chris May say that back at the beginning of November before the season started?
I think that it's important to demand of any program to push for excellence. So in general terms, I don't have a problem with that. But with the landscape changing, to me, it's not a black and white, this has to happen, or this is all going away, or something like that. The NIL situation has really hamstrung the Billikens and a number of other mid-major type programs in top 10 leagues like the A10. It's really been difficult. I know for a fact that the Billikens lost 2 players going into this season that were difference makers that had agreed to terms, NIL terms, and then were contacted by other programs who upped the offer and drew them out of their Billiken commitment. In fact, one of the schools said, "What are they paying you?" The player told them, and they said, "We'll double it."
Jesus.
So,
wow.
What are you supposed to do? I guess the answer is, well, you got to counter, and then it keeps going up and up and up and up, and there's no salary cap. And, so what are you going to do? The Billiken Victory Fund, which is the NIL group for St. Louis University, is making great progress, but they're not at the point yet that they can go outbid Power Fives. I'm not saying it's going to be that's the way it's going to be forever. I'm just saying as of today. So if that's what we agree on today, somebody else may disagree with my position on this, but if that's what we agree on, then can you simply say, make the tournament or we make changes? I just think life in general, and college basketball more specifically, is in a place where gray area right now is the area we got to try and figure out.
Yeah, and I think your point about the Power 5 thing, I think it's indicative just to look at, right out of the gate. Obviously, everyone was new to it, but right out of the gate, NIL becomes a thing. And SLU, based on some of the reporting we saw, they beat out a Power 5 school for, a very important player out of the gate, Yuri Collins. And so, they can do it, but like you said, the circumstances of it is certainly going to be very different when you're talking about a 4-year starter who has half the record book piled in already versus 2 freshmen where you don't know what it's going to be, or maybe a transfer where you don't know how he's going to make the transition. That changes the calculus in a big way.
In a huge way. And again, I don't want to make excuses. And I think this is just not a Billiken issue. I think it's a mid-major issue. And I think we're a year or 2 away from really maybe running in the streets with our hair on fire. But if this trend continues, I think it's going to be, we're in danger of, I'm not predicting it, but we're in danger of going back to the way it was in the 70s and into the 80s, where you basically had a 1A and a 1AA. Those are football terms, and would the 1A group even allow the 1AA group into your tournament at the end of the year? Now, this seems that maybe seems paranoid. Again, I'm not predicting it, but I think there's a danger of that.
Yeah, that's fair. And listen, I this is all very real, and it all affects a lot of it. This is a big part of the conversation that I've heard from a lot of fans. On the flip side, there's also a lot of conversation about what's going on the court right now for the Billikens. We're not going to paint over the fact that this probably isn't going to be one of those seasons where you make the jump from 20 wins to a tournament season, just based on what we've seen so far. Obviously, a lot of young players that can change things, but so far, obviously, the big losses in Myrtle Beach, the offensive rebounding was problematic. The scoring, obviously, is going to be a question for the next 5-6 weeks without Sincere Parker. But overall, right out of the gate, I just have to say 2 or 3 takeaways out of the gate. First of all, for a freshman, Cian Medley is really impressing me as a point guard. His hands are active defensively. He's got a much better shot than I think a lot of people expected. And he's obviously handling the offense. He looks in control.
Moreover, his defense is dynamic.
God, I mean, he's I would say he's getting 2 or 3 tips when the guy's just got the ball in his hands. He's getting 2 or 3 tips every single game so far. He's been incredible. I think TJ Hargrove, despite obviously being outmatched and undersized throughout the entire game, has been very impressive. They've given him the ball a lot, and I refer to him as the fulcrum. He said him and Travis have been calling him the quarterback of the offense. I think you've seen at different times that work, and at other times he's struggled simply because he's giving up 6 inches and 30 pounds to a lot of the guys guarding him one-on-one. I think Larry Hughes has shown a lot of promise right out of the gate. Ball handling's good. Defense is right there. Obviously, that jumper that we talked about in the first episode continues to look good. The shot selection maybe needs a little bit of work, but other than that, he is really showing out right now. And then obviously a little bit from Bruce Zhang. I mean, every screen is illegal, but I mean the hustle's there, and I like to see that.
Yeah, he's trying to learn the game. Even in the Dartmouth win the other night, stepped in the lane. He's still, in his mind, he's still playing international rules.
Yeah.
He cost Sincere Parker in the Wyoming victory a bucket by flushing it down while it was in the cylinder. You can do that in international ball.
Yeah.
I think the promise is there. What's interesting about him, and I'd love to get a candid conversation sometime with Travis about it. You know how I feel about coaches, and I love coaches and coaching, and I also understand coaches hate freshmen, and they hate uncontrollable situations. And whereas we may, because our job's not on the line, we may sit back and go, well, you got to play Bruce, and maybe he'll fall out of games, and maybe he'll make some mistakes, but live with it because he'll grow into the spot sooner. I believe that, and I think it's true. But can Travis afford mistakes that can cost him games early? And that is that tipping point, the balance point that the head coach has to find.
Yeah, I mean, and he's playing him. I've honestly been impressed with how much he's played the young guys. I tweeted it out at one point. Dartmouth, there was 3 sophomores and 2 freshmen on the court at one point in the game. And obviously part of that is his hand has been forced, and we kind of got to it a little bit with the NIL and how that's affecting recruiting a little bit earlier on. I think that part, I don't want to go back to that completely, but I think there's some people saying, well, in your 7th, 8th year, should you have depth issues to this level? But again, everything changed at year 6. And so you can't really, I don't know if you can really use that same criticism on a guy in year 8 as you would 10 years ago.
That's true. This is going to sound like excuse making, and it's only throwing out information so people can make up their own minds. This has been a program really since Rick Majerus died that has just had one stroke of bad luck after another. So you went 1-2 in your 3 games at Myrtle Beach. What's the one difference between your win and your 2 losses that you can absolutely point to? Your leading scorer wasn't available.
Cian Parker, yeah. 100%.
He broke his foot.
Yeah.
So for a team that's already undermanned, and you know that, now you lose your best all-around scorer. Excuse me. Bad luck. Hey, everybody has injuries, right? I get it. But you don't think you have Kentucky's roster with 9 All-Americans, do you? No, you don't. That's silly to make that comparison. Here's the other one that we'll never be able to prove because until you see him on the court. But Brad Ezewiru still doesn't have his waiver from the NCAA. I'm telling you, this young man is a difference maker.
Yeah,
a difference maker. Well, you thought you had him. You felt you made your appeal. You felt like it was a good case, and now the poor kid's just in limbo. Well, he can sit out this year and play next year. You better figure it out this year. You got to get it done this year. Next year is fantasy land. And so you've had a couple strokes of bad luck there before you 1 week into the season. You missed the guy who would be a starting center difference maker and your leading scorer. This and most mid-major programs can't overcome that.
Yeah, good point. And they certainly couldn't overcome the loss of Cian Parker in Myrtle Beach. It's going to be interesting to see how they fare scoring-wise over the next month or so. That's about the 5-week timeline for Cian Parker. Obviously, Tomorrow evening is going to be a test right out of the gate. Utah State, a big jump when you look at KenPom rankings over who they played before this. That's going to be a big jump tomorrow night. And my big thing has to be Gibson Jimerson because I think if you look at some of the numbers too, just look at the last 2 games for the Billikens. They thought they knew they could drive the ball against Dartmouth. Gibson Jimerson takes 18 shots, only 5 of them are threes. They're out oversized against Wichita State, and they're down early. Gibson Jimerson takes 15 shots, 11 of them are threes. So it's really, I think that it's indicative of how important he is to the offense and how much he's going to be the driver of what we see. And really, it'd be a good time for him to have a 25 point game because he's been inconsistent right now. The shot hasn't been great. He's having a little bit of trouble at the rim as well. But this would be a game for him to come out and frankly, he's had about a game every season early on where he starts off a little slow and then he shakes it off and goes for a big one. They're going to need it tomorrow night, I think.
Well, the other thing when you talk about Jimerson, and explain this to me. I try to be objective. I really make an effort, but you're clearly more objective when it comes to Billiken basketball, and that is tell me why officials refuse to call fouls away from the ball. Are they getting caught ball watching?
Yes.
Is it a directive from their bosses?
Yes.
I mean, I implore someone, watch a Billiken game and just watch Jimerson.
Yeah.
If somebody did that to him on the street, they'd be arrested.
And I wonder if maybe it's kind of like a cyclical thing because I wonder if around the A10 it's gotten to a point where they're just like, just don't. Travis is going to hound you. Gibson's going to give you looks. Just don't listen to them. They're whining about it. I don't know if maybe it's that kind of like critical mass where it's like a cyclical thing where it's like, well, it's obviously not getting calls. They should get more calls. They complain because it makes sense that you want the official to be like, listen, you got to take your eyes off the ball. And I do think they ball watch. I think a lot of officials nowadays have more and more, onus on them to get every single call right in the moment, even though we have review, people hate using review. And I think that's why they get caught ball watching. And that's a huge problem because he gets grabbed all day.
You need great officiating to have a great game. And we both love the game of college basketball. You need great officiating. One of the other things is an official might turn around. What do you want? 50 free throws in a game? No, none of us wants that. But we want teams to clean it up.
Yeah.
So if you don't, here's my view. If you don't sacrifice a couple of ugly games to make a point as officials, it'll never stop. And I think it's bad for the game.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Quick question about some of these games that we saw. And this is my appreciation from college basketball, something I love. Why can SLU and why can other college programs not pass the ball as fast as Vermont? Jesus, Lord all freaking mighty, like 6 shooters on their goddamn wrists. Like these guys, every single pass in that Vermont game is just snap. I mean, ball's faster than man. Vermont must have that stapled somewhere on a whiteboard because every ball was faster than every rotation every single time in that game. That was pristine.
Trust and connectivity.
Oh my God, it was beautiful.
Trust your teammate to be where he's supposed to be, and you're connected to each other. The Billikens aren't there yet. Most teams aren't there yet. You're right about that. But, let's face it, you got a group of really smart guys. They know where they're supposed to be. They get there. They played hard. They really played their butts off. And but they trust each other and they're connected. And that's those are 2 words that explain how and why.
One thing I wanted to get into in the Dartmouth game just the other night, because one consistent complaint I see from people about Travis Ford is the lack of adjustments mid-game. And first of all, I think the games in Myrtle Beach were fascinating because I think we saw Travis go more to zone looks against offenses that were really giving them trouble than I really think we've ever seen him. And we saw 2-3-3, 2-3, 3-2, 1-3-1. We saw a bunch of different zone combinations to try to make things, kind of shuffle things up. And so, first of all, I appreciated the fact that he kept trying different things, even though the zone at times was getting beat even worse than man was. But the Dartmouth game jumped out to me because, and we talked to Travis after the game about this, right out of the gate in the second half, they started getting a lot of open threes on the pick and pop with Monroe because TJ was just playing the drop like he always does in the pick and roll. Well, then, after he hit one early, and then he had 2 or 3 possessions in a row where he got wide open 3 looks and he couldn't convert. Man, that would have changed the game completely. So he wasn't able to convert those. And it felt like he's going to hit one of these and this is going to be bad. Then the Billikens go to a timeout, come back, and now they're switching everything. Usually they switch, 1 through 4. But with the 5s, TJ stays on a drop and the man follows. So then they come out of this timeout, they're switching everything now. And it starts working for a couple possessions. But then we saw what would then happen in the last possessions, which is Dartmouth then figures that out and goes, okay, now we have Mike Meadows on Monroe, mouse in the house. Let's go get some points easy. And you saw that in the second to last possession when they go at Meadows on the switch. You see it in the last possession where they get Gibson Jimerson. And I don't even think they really switched on a screen. I think the Billikens knew what they were going to try to do and just said, let's just go ahead and switch it out of the gate because we know what's going to happen. And then you had that last sequence. And obviously leaving the leading scorer of the game without a guy within 15 feet of him is not a good look defensively. But I did just appreciate the fact that, in talking to Travis afterwards, he talked about how they went through plan A, plan B, plan C. I did like the fact that there was a very noticeable and easy to see transition of here's how SLU's playing the defense, here's Dartmouth's counter, here's SLU's counter, but then here's the counter from Dartmouth and how it almost completely worked out with them. I did think that was a fascinating back and forth. And again, maybe St. Louis didn't switch as fast as what people think. Maybe they should have run something different in that last play, expecting that switch, other than Gibson being the guy on Monroe. Otherwise, it worked. You got the win. And I really thought it was a fascinating, though, back and forth between Travis and Dartmouth in that game.
Critics are fine. I don't have any problem with critics. You remember Travis called that early timeout after that? Was it an 8-0 or 9-0 run? I think it was a 9-0 run. So what was happening there? Was it scheme? No, it wasn't scheme. The players were supposed to be guarding the 3. They knew that Dartmouth was going to come out and concentrate on shooting 3s. Mm-hmm. There was not player execution. So does that go back to coaching because they don't do what they tell you? Gosh, I don't know, chicken or egg. I'm just telling you that the defensive game plan wasn't executed early. And then the one thing that I don't know enough about what they're trying to do when they switch. See, what Dartmouth was doing is have everybody on the perimeter, and as you said, have a big go down. Mm-hmm. So if everybody's on the perimeter, 20 feet away from the basket, how do you help Mike Meadows down there? Where does the help come from?
You got to tag. But and that's the thing, though, is that, you know, and this was a big thing in the Wyoming and early parts of the Vermont game, which is, you know, how hard can you tag, and then how good are they passing to hit the three open shooters off your tags? That's the other question.
So Dartmouth, though, we know they're moving the ball.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have an answer for you on that. Yeah. I just know that getting post help in a mismatch has got to be figured out.
Absolutely. And again, I also just think, though, and I wasn't pointing out even for criticism. My point was, I think people don't see when they just focus on why is Gibson a mismatch? Why is Meadows mismatched in those last two possessions? Did St. Louis screw up to get there? It's like, no. They're and that's because of a counter. But this is the punch, and you know, this is how the boxing match of a basketball game works between two coaches. I just think people don't always think about how the play with 19:30 left in the second affects the play with 2:30 left in the second.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, those things are absolutely 100% connected.
They are. You're absolutely right. And so what has to happen is, you mentioned the Hargrove drop. Not every big that the Billikens face will be able to step out and hit threes. And but it certainly looks like Dartmouth exposed a problem when you can't play big enough. You know, you probably don't want Bruce Zhang 22 feet away from the basket trying to guard a guy man to man. We all get that. But by the same token, you don't want Cian Medley or Mike Meadows having to guard a 6'10", 240-pound guy on the block. And so these are things you got to figure out. And it's going to be a challenge in the near future for sure.
One other thing that you made me think of right there, offensive rebounds. They obviously they obviously did better, and they weren't worried about Dartmouth because they even said, like, we knew we could get downhill. They don't have shot blockers.
Yeah.
It was a very different game plan than we're going to see from most teams. And so, do you think that the Billikens should kind of start treating offensive rebounds the way a lot of NBA teams do, which is say, we're never going to worry about that, but we're going to be the best damn transition defense team because we're never going to worry about an offensive rebound? Do you think SLU, until they get an Ezewiro, if that does happen, do you think SLU should maybe take a look at that kind of extreme and say, this is never going to be a part of the game we're going to win, so we're absolutely going to win a different part?
I hate to concede things. That's not my style, but I wouldn't rule that out as a legitimate option to consider.
Yeah, it's something I'd like to see, just because I know Travis, just like you, he doesn't want to concede things. He certainly doesn't want to concede offensive rebounds, and he's going to attack the boards against the team he can. Right. I'm just saying, if the team's got a 6'7" center, 6'7", power forward who can hit the glass, and a 6'10" center, you got to start, thinking of different things. To wit, you got to be interested. You can't just be kind of, different when you have a 6'4" center on offense. You got to do different things defensively and in transition too. They already admitted that having a 6'4" center means we got to try different stuff offensively. We got to give them the ball a bunch. We got to do one of the plays I've seen them running a lot now, which is Gibson screens for TJ, and then TJ's the handler on the pick and roll. So you can't just get creative on the offensive end with a 6'4" center. You got to get creative in all three phases of the game with it, I think. And I think that's one way they could do it. Maybe they go a little bit that way against Utah State on Tuesday night. We have yet to see, but I do think Travis is going to have to get creative. And I do think a lot of people underestimate how creative the man can be.
Yeah, and then one last thing about Bruce Zhang and his potential. He kind of messed himself up. The rule stuff, that they'll all figure that out. But he got the ball. He was given the ball in a position which is not where you want him to get the ball. Mm-hmm. That's the passer's fault, not Bruce's fault. What became Bruce's fault was the 15-foot fadeaway jumper from the short corner.
You don't want that.
That's his fault.
Yeah, that was
so you got culpability on both ends of that pass.
I hate it.
He's got to know, if I get it here either get it right back out again and go repost and get to the spot I want, or work to back my man down, but that's bogs things down. So that's part of the inexperience, that can he develop quickly enough to give you positive minutes moving forward?
And he's an inexperienced guy on an inexperienced team.
Yeah.
I would like to think, because I think you're also getting at that with that Dogger and Zhang and Bruce play. You're also looking at, I think, a team that has a lot of spacing issues because they too often overload. They overload the weak side when a guy has the ball on like the block. They'll overload the weak side. They give him no outlets. Everything's clumped together. I have to think that in like that situation, there should be better space, and there should be a guy probably maybe even on that wing or in that corner to kick it out to. I just think the spacing right now hasn't been as good as it will be in a month or two.
What I would tell you there is, and this is without really going over video and diagramming things, I think that's more of an issue that Travis talked to us about on the radio side, about players making bad choices on offense. Gotcha. I think that it's more about that than the system, and understanding where you're most dangerous, where your teammates are most dangerous, and when each player should get the ball and where, when and where, and then getting to a point where you don't have to think about it, and it's part of what we do. And right now, you basically got a 9-man rotation, and most coaches like 7 or 8, but I think 9 is what you're going to get for a while. George Churchich is sort of that 10th guy, but he's not getting many minutes. But they've got to figure out who they are on offense.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Kellen Thames, we haven't really talked about him at all
He's
this episode.
terrific.
I love what he's doing. He's always creeping from the corner. He's either like trying to shoot a 3. He's hunting every offensive rebound. Maybe that's the one guy you always say, as long as he's on the court, let him hunt. Everybody else get back on transition defense, because then he can just press and stuff because he's so damn long and good at defense anyway. And that's the thing is, I understand why people are down on this season. I understand. I'm sure tomorrow night might not, help a lot, but there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of young players, and they're showing a lot. They're showing a lot of promise and growth right out of the gate. And again, that might not be what you want to hear at this point in an 8 years coach's tenure, but you can't just ignore the fact that there are some good things. And listen, there are some negatives, and those are real things, and I think we've talked about a lot of them so far. But I like looking at the good things when it comes to basketball. We can talk about Tim Gallagher throwing that pass, or we can talk about how the guy strides like he's a long jumper. I think it's fun to watch. He tries to turn guys' shoulder and then take like one step just to get to the entire hoop. I appreciate the audacity from Tim Gallagher and the way he plays basketball.
And Tim is tough as a $5 steak.
I like that. Well, the Billikens have 2 games before we'll talk to you next. Tomorrow night against Utah State, and then they travel away to face off against the Salukis of SIUE on Sunday afternoon.
Saturday afternoon at 2:30.
Saturday afternoon at 2:30, 7 p.m. against Utah State tomorrow. Rambo will be on the call for those games, and we'll be back next week to talk more Billikens basketball on 2-man game on ClavesOnline.com. Before we let them go, though, Rammer, tell them all about Royal Banks of Missouri.
Royal Banks of Missouri, St. Louis, East Side, St. Charles County, and 3 locations in Northeast Missouri, and each and every one feels like your hometown bank. Royal Banks of Missouri, where better service means better banking. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Thanks, Rammer. We'll talk to you next week, sir.